Welcome back, and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective, the podcast with subject matter experts in marketing. How do you, as a marketer, cut through all of the clutter and the noise? We've got thousands of messages hitting us daily. One important way to reach people who typically default to hardwired behaviors is to apply some behavioral science to your marketing strategy. Have you tried to connect with your customers, even at that subconscious level, in order to think about how they're going to react to a message? Nancy Harhut is a creative marketer, a behavioral scientist, and a speaker that I've been lucky enough to hear several times. I learned something every time from her. And on this episode, we'll discuss behavioral science, reaching the subconscious, the power of brands, familiarity across a purchaser's journey, personalization, and more. So let's tune in to behavioral scientists and a shark behaving well on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Nancy, thank you so much for joining me today on A Shark's Perspective. If you would please tell us a little bit about your career and yourself, your career to date.
Well, Kenneth, thanks so much for having
Of
me. I'm,
course.
I'm uh, delighted to be on the podcast. And so I'm a creative director by trade. I came up on the copywriting side and have always pretty much stayed in demand gen or direct marketing, digital marketing. And over the last 10 or 12 years, what I've really started to focus on is adding behavioral science to marketing best practices in order to increase the likelihood that people will do what my clients want them to do.
Well, so you said at the top, Nancy, the psychology of marketing completely fascinates me. How does behavioral science apply to marketing? In effect, what's the difference between behavioral science and what we do as marketers in general with looking at campaign performance and testing and optimizing, et cetera?
Sure, that's a great question. I guess in a phrase, the difference is the ability to beat your benchmarks and beat your controls, but that deserves to be pulled apart a little bit. So I think as a good marketer, generally speaking, we should be following best practices. So we should know what's been proven to work. We should be embracing that, but we should also keep our eyes on emerging techniques and emerging technologies. And as you'd mentioned, Kenneth, testing and learning and continually optimizing. These are all smart things for us to do. And I think that as a good marketer, generally speaking, that's what we do. But there's another layer you can add on to that that
Mm-hmm.
actually will increase the likelihood that you're going to get better response, that you're going to be able to optimize your campaigns, and that you're going to get people to do what you want them to do. And that's by layering in this idea of behavioral science. What's happened is social scientists and behavioral economists have done a lot of research into how people make decisions, because if you think about it, at the end of the day in marketing, we want people to make decisions, right? We want them to try or buy again, or click or call or walk into our store or offer up some data or refer us to a friend. We want someone to make some kind of a decision. So social scientists and behavioral economists have studied exactly what makes people make decisions, and they've uncovered a wealth of information. And if we as marketers start to apply that to our strategies and to our creative executions, we increase the likelihood that we're going to get people to do what we want them to do. And that's the difference between being, generally speaking, a good marketer and being a good marketer who embraces behavioral science.
Sure. Well, as a marketer, then, how do I apply a behavioral science lens to what I'm doing in marketing? And I mean, if I want to peel apart the different layers of what we do with campaigns, for example, how do I look specifically at the behavioral science part of that and isolate it? And how do I slightly switch my, say, email campaign manager hat to a behavioral science hat?
Sure. I'd say there are probably two ways to do that, really, because you have an opportunity to inject behavioral science into your strategic approach, and you also have an opportunity to inject behavioral science into the actual creative output, the copy and the design of your campaign. And so, if you're looking at it from a strategic point of view, I think one of the first things you do is you you say to yourself, all right, this is who my target audience is. This is the action I want my
Mm-hmm.
target to take, and then you start to hypothesize about why people aren't going to do what you want them to do. What are the major reasons that would prevent them from doing what you want them to do? And then you start to think about what's the best way to overcome that. What are the best arguments or the best levers that you can put into play to overcome these obstacles? And as you're doing that, That's where I think you start to look into behavioral science, because social scientists and behavioral economists have uncovered a number of different principles in terms of why people do what they do, things that govern the automatic, instinctive, reflexive responses that we all have. You start to look at those and you say, all right, where can I start to inject some of these into the strategic approach I'm going to take? Because basically what they found is, as much as we all like to think that we make well thought out, considered, deliberate decisions, very often what we end up doing is relying on decision making shortcuts. We have these automatic, instinctive, reflexive behaviors. We just default to them without giving them a lot of thought.
Hmm.
So, as a marketer, if we know about this, we can start to find opportunities to inject that into our strategies. So, if we know that, for example, people are more motivated to avoid the pain of loss than they are to achieve the pleasure of gain, we might want to think about serving up our message in a way that triggers that. So instead of talking about all the wonderful things that will happen if you just do what I want you to do, maybe we talk about the horrible things that you can
Right.
avoid
Sure.
if you do what I want you to do. Or we talk about the horrible things that may happen if you don't do what I want you to do. So you can start to structure your strategies that way. Now, the second thing you can do is you can start to inject this into your campaign output, your copy and your design, and you can do this. You can do this with a roadmap of a behavioral science influenced strategy, so that you know you're going to be injecting these things. Or some of my clients will come to me and say, here's our campaign, it's running, is there anything you can do to fine tune it, to look for opportunities to make some small changes that will allow us to inject some behavioral science into what we currently have? And that's certainly possible. So you take a look at what's out there, you'd look at the language that's used, you would look at um, the way the marketing proposition is described, you would look at the art direction and the design, and you would look for opportunities to just add some proven behavioral science techniques into an existing campaign to show some, incremental lift in response. So both of those ways are ways that you can look through the lens of behavioral science and take a campaign to the next
Great.
level.
Yeah. So Nobel Prize winning psychologist Dr. Herbert Simon coined the phrase poverty of attention in 1971. I think he was specifically talking to me, but it was at the dawn of the information age. And so for people like me today that have the attention span of a flea, that rings so very true. And do you think it applies today to consumers in general with the noise and volume of messages that we receive? And how does that attention affect decisions and purchasing? And how do you break through all of that at, basically the subconscious level?
So I think I think it's funny you said he coined the phrase thinking about you
He
in
was.
particular, but
I didn't know him, but
um,
I think he was thinking about me.
I suspect he had most of our target market in
Yeah,
mind
that's true.
when he coined that. I think marketers wrestle with this all the time, and it's only getting worse. There was a study that came out of the National Center for Biotechnology Information, and they said that the average attention span is 8 seconds for humans, and that was recently eclipsed by the goldfish, which has a 9 second attention span. I mean,
Nice.
I have no idea how they measure the attention span of goldfish, but I think it's clear for for all of us in marketing that the people that we're trying to reach have very short attention spans. Or someone else coined the phrase, and I can't remember who can, but someone else coined the phrase continuous partial attention. And I think there's a lot of that going on as well. Everyone thinks that they can multitask, although scientists have proven that very, very, very few people really can. Most of us just shift our attention quickly from one thing to another, and we think we're multitasking. And so you've got people who are distracted. We're consuming a lot of content on our mobile devices, which makes it even more likely going to be distracted. But we're distracted. We think we can multitask. We really can't. Our attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. And so, as marketers, we really have our work cut out for us, because it's hard to capture people's attention. It's also hard to break through, as you said, that volume of noise, because it just seems like more and more marketers are entering the fray. I think at last count, the average American is subjected to 5,000 marketing messages every day, and the human brain has gotten really, really efficient at screening out all but the most necessary information. And so it's not easy
No.
to break through and to reach people. But there are a few ways that behavioral science can help us do that. Um, One way is actually by tapping into storytelling, and there's been a lot of buzz about storytelling in marketing lately, but it's well deserved. I mean, stories were how people were able to pass down information from generation to generation before the written word. Stories
100%.
are evolving. Yeah, it's when you think about it, that was how people communicated. And stories, they're involving, they're engaging. Stories allow us to draw our own conclusions, which is great because while we may argue with what someone else tells us, we rarely argue with our own conclusions. But science also provides another explanation as to why storytelling is so important for us as marketers. And that is when we hear or read a story, it involves other parts of our brain. So if we're just dealing with facts and figures, there are a couple of parts of our brains that are activated, Broca's area and Wernicke's area. They're the two areas that are responsible for processing language. But if you're listening to a story or if you're reading a story, other parts of your brain get activated. If you read about somebody, running down the street, that activates your motor cortex. Or if you read about the aroma of fresh brewed hazelnut coffee, that activates your olfactory cortex. And the net is the more parts of your brain that get activated, the better you understand something and the longer you retain it. So
Hmm.
that's a really nice way to kind of crack through to the subconscious. And there are other ways also, but that's, I think, one good way. Another good way is by tapping into something that social scientists refer to as the von Restorff effect. And basically, what the von Restorff effect means is the human brain notices and remembers things that are different. So, as marketers, sometimes we intuitively say, oh, I'm going to do something that's a little different because it's going to stand out. And it turns out that science actually validates that through the von Restorff effect. We have a tendency to notice things that are unlike everything around them, and those things actually make more of a lasting imprint on our brain. So we have a tendency to remember them more. So we have the von Restorff effect, we have storytelling. Marketers also can tap into the psychology of surprise, which is interesting because when we're surprised, it intensifies our emotions by about 400%. It focuses our attention and it makes it that much more likely that we're going to remember something. So, surprising somebody with a marketing campaign, with an interesting twist on a marketing campaign, is another good way to crack through to the subconscious.
I've had the pleasure of hearing and seeing you speak on several occasions, and in the most recent occasion at Connect to Convert, where you followed a really brilliant opening keynote speaker. By the way, I don't know if you remember that moment.
Um, I remember being at Connect to Convert. I remember speaking with you, and I'm trying to remember who I followed and whether or not I was like in the green room rehearsing or whether I actually listened to the keynote.
It
Oh,
was it was me.
wait a minute, wait a minute. It's you. It
Yes.
was you that
Yeah,
I followed.
yeah. That's why it wasn't that.
Now,
See how much I stood out. Well, you in your speech, which was fantastic, you gave much better than mine. You gave the example that I loved about how people 95% of the time will buy a brand name aspirin product, at least in this example, over the generic version of the exact same thing. And I think if memory serves me correctly, Bayer, I believe, was the example in the graphic, but it could have been, any generic pharma product for any type of ailment with any drug. But why is that? Why would a brand name trump the value of the product itself?
yeah, this was really interesting. There was some research that actually showed that this was the case. What happens is people will tell researchers that they know that it's the same active ingredient in a generic pain reliever as in a brand name pain reliever, like a Bayer, for example. But knowing this doesn't make a difference if their headache is particularly bad. When their headache is particularly bad, they'll end up spending the extra money for the brand name pain reliever. It's as if something in their subconscious actually overrules what they know
Yeah.
rationally. And social scientists have found that this actually happens a lot. Up to 95% of our purchase decision making actually takes place in the subconscious brain, where we rely on these decision making shortcuts and we're not really deliberately making decisions. We're not really putting our thinking caps on and weighing the pros and cons and coming to logical conclusions. And in some cases, we're not always making the decisions that are in our best interest. We might actually be spending more for a pain reliever when we don't need to. But again, we rely on these decision making shortcuts, and we're not always rational. And as a result, we end up maybe overpaying or maybe purchasing something that isn't in our best interest or the best thing for us, but we're just cruising along on autopilot, and this is what we do.
Yeah. Well, if anything, it's a great reminder. It definitely shows the powerful value of building a brand name and leveraging that when you can. So, at least how do we get in front of that and push people and customers and consumers in our direction? What are some of the tips and tricks that we need to use to have in our ads and our banners and our emails that are going to help this stand out?
Well, one way I think to build that brand name is just through repetition, but we don't all have the media dollars to do that. But if you have the media dollars and you can just be out there, the more that you're out there, the more familiar people get with you, and the more easy you are to recall. There have been a couple of studies that indicate that if you're the market leader and then a competitor goes out and advertises, very often people will see the ad and credit it to the competitor. I'm sorry, credit it to the market leader because they're the market leader. So it's a great position to be in if you're the market leader.
Yeah.
If you don't have the money to be the market leader, it can be a little bit tough. But again, that's where behavioral science comes in. And there are certain things that you can do as you're creating your ads or your banners or your emails that will make it more likely that your message is noticed and acted upon. One is by using certain words. There are certain words that I call eye magnet words because they've been scientifically proven to attract the human eye. Because when you think about it, when we write in a very linear fashion, one word followed by the next, followed by the next. But when we skim and we scan and our eye goes all over the place until we see something that interests us, that stops us, and then we go in and we more fully consume content. And there are certain words that have been proven to actually attract the human eye. There have been in market tests, eye tracking studies, heat mapping studies. Neuroscientists even put people into fMRI machines, flash different words in front of their faces, and look to see what parts of their brains light up. And all of these studies, from the most simple to the most sophisticated, prove that some words have the power to attract the human eye. One of the words is the word you. In fact, Copyblogger lists you as one of the top 5 most persuasive words in the English language. Another word that they put on that list is the word new. And it turns out that there's a scientific reason for that. Actually, there's a scientific reason for both of them. We're attracted to the word you because we're more interested in ourselves than in anyone else.
Sure.
And the word you is kind of a substitute for who we are. The word new is interesting because the human brain is hardwired to seek out the new and novel, because when we find something that we think is new, it activates the pleasure center in our brains. That releases dopamine, and that feels really good. So we're constantly jonesing for that next hit of dopamine. So as we're cruising along, skimming and scanning, and we see the word new, it holds out the promise for that dopamine hit that's going to feel good. So we zero right in. So using the word you, the word free
Mm-hmm.
is great. Sometimes as marketers we don't like it. At one point it was a horrible thing to use in our emails because it could flag us as spam. That's not the case, and I guess it hasn't been, according to world data, for like the last 4 or 5 years. World data runs a study on email subject lines, and they found that it was the top performing subject line word for the last 4 or 5 years. Sidekick ran a study. They found you get a 10% lift in opening rates by using it. So free is a good word to use in our email subject lines and our ads and our banners. And the reason for that is we get this uh, this jolt of pleasure when we find something that's free. We overvalue things that are free because it just creates this emotional charge in us. So as marketers, we're like, we don't want to give it away for free, or we don't want
Right.
to use that word again. But as consumers, we just get this incredible emotional charge from the word free, and so we pay attention to it. I think world data, again, I'm going to go back to them because they're a great source of information. They found that you get twice as many opens with free as you do with the word complimentary. And if you think about it, we would say that those words both pretty much mean the same thing, and one would even argue that complimentary sounds a little classier, but free is the thing that people respond to. So we have new, we have free. The word secrets is interesting. And the reason for that is human beings are more persuaded by information we believe isn't widely available or isn't readily available. So if you can offer someone the secret to something, or the inside story, the scoop on, the real truth, the story behind any of those words or phrases that suggest you've got information that isn't widely or readily available, these are all things that pull people in and get them to pay attention and to read. Um, so those are some of the
Well,
tips and tricks you can use.
another one I've heard you reference before in a conference is because. And I get tons of emails from different sellers saying because you purchased, and it really stands out.
Sure. Thank you for reminding me, Kenneth. That's a great example, because it's what's known as a automatic compliance trigger, which is kind of a mouthful of a phrase that
Sure.
basically means when we see or hear the word because, we start to nod yes, we start to agree or comply without fully processing what comes next. We just assume that whatever comes after that word because is a good, logical, legitimate reason, and so we agree. And this was proven by a Harvard University researcher. Her name was Ellen Langer, and she ran something that's become known as the um, photocopier test, or the photocopier experiment. And what happened was, she had a bunch of people that were lined up to use a photocopier, like a Xerox machine. And she sent someone to the head of the line, and that person said, "Excuse me, can I cut in front of you?" And 60% of the time they were allowed to cut. So Dr. Langer repeats the experiment a second time, and she instructs the person to go to the front of the line. But this time, the person says, "Excuse me, can I cut in front of you? Because I'm in a hurry and I have some copies to make." And now that 60% number climbs to 94%,
Wow.
which is, yeah, it's pretty
Yeah.
dramatic. And
Yeah.
and as I tell you this, you might think, well, they said they were in a hurry. So Langer repeats the experiment a third and final time, sends someone to the head of the line, and this time they say, "Excuse me, can I cut in front of you? Because I have some copies to make." So the 94% number drops to 93%, statistically insignificant drop. But if you think about it, everybody was standing in that line because they had some copies to make. They weren't standing in line at the photocopier to get a coffee, right? Or if they were, they had a problem. But what Langer did is, she identified that word "because" as a compliance trigger. When we see or hear it, we just start to nod yes without fully processing what comes next. Can I cut in front of you because I have some copies to make? Hey, listen, buddy, I also have copies to make. That's
Exactly.
why I'm standing here. Get behind me.
And she didn't say because it's an emergency that I've got to run to immediately. It's because I have copies to make.
Exactly. So, I mean, I guess the truth of the matter is, having a reason, any kind of a reason, is better than not. If we give people a reason why we're asking them to do something, they're much more likely to comply. They're much more likely to agree. One could say, or one could argue, I guess, if you had an even better reason, can you let me go because I'm in a hurry because I'm going to miss my plane or something,
Sure.
that might be better. But just having some kind of a reason seems to be enough psychologically to get more people to comply. And I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is this idea that people are cruising along on autopilot. They're not always operating with their thinking caps on. They're not always paying complete attention.
Couldn't
And
agree
so
more.
as a result, we just we default to these hardwired behaviors. And "because" is a word that triggers one of those hardwired behaviors.
So, behavioral science, all this we're talking about, helps explain what is familiar. But how do we decide on when to market new versus what we continue to buy over and over again? And if you're, thinking of giving a website or a product line or an ad or anything else a makeover, then taking that into account is pretty necessary. I know as marketers, we push everyone to our best sellers, but should we?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, on the one hand, there's something known as social proof. When people aren't sure of what to do, they look to others, particularly others like themselves, and they follow their lead. So if we can say this is our bestseller, or this is the most popular product, it's a nice shortcut way to give people the reassurance that they're going to make a good decision. Oh, other people are buying this, I guess I will too. So it's that's a wonderful thing to do. But then when we start to look at segmentation, what we could find is a series of bestsellers. So for segment A, this might be the bestseller. Segment B, this might be the bestseller. Segment C, on the other hand, might be over here with this other bestseller. So what that could do is, that could allow us to sell even more product. So I think at a basic level, it's a fine idea to let people know what the most popular, best selling, fastest growing product, service, or category is, because people have a tendency rely on that. But if we could start to segment and create mini bestsellers for the
Mm-hmm.
various segments, that can be a really good thing to do. I think we're torn between wanting something that's familiar, something that we're comfortable with, and against that, we want something that's new, that's different. So we're interested in new news, we're interested in new products or new uses for products, but at the same time, we also feel very, very comfortable with the products that we use all the time, that we've become acclimated to. So from a product perspective, new can be good, On the other hand, if you've got somebody who's just used to doing the same thing over and over again, you almost don't want to rock the boat. When we're talking about, I think you said redesigning a website, I think there it's important to make sure that we still have some of the same cues and conventions that people are used to seeing, because
Agreed.
that's
Mm.
not going to upset them. But then if you can inject something just a little bit
Yeah.
different that maybe springboards off of something that they're already familiar with, that's just enough to keep them engaged and coming back.
I think you need to look and see if new-ish is a word that's going to drive a lot of traffic.
Yes.
Well, so visuals and creative can also help drive, familiarity and behaviors. And when you look at ads that drive to whatever landing pages or websites you have, what guidance do you give clients with keeping that creative similar? And what I mean is, I very often over my own career have told people to keep the conversation or the line, if you will, narrow in that if they click on an ad based on one creative, like a display banner, but could apply to any type of creative, but keep the same ish creative so that the consumer feels more comfortable when they get to that landing spot, for lack of a better way of explaining that, throughout the journey. And so many marketers think that you can say take the logo and that's the anchor on any creative, but I tend to think if it's a picture of a car or a puppy or anything else, then at least the puppy for this analogy should be a golden retriever, a cute golden retriever puppy on the front end, and not a border collie on the landing page. But Nancy, please tell me that's a brilliant point on my part, or if I'm completely wrong in how we should look at other than those being two really cute puppies.
Kenneth, you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. And I think it comes down to giving people that immediate reassurance that they've landed in the right place. So they've looked at that display ad or that email or whatever the originating message is. They've found something that they want, and then they're supposed to click, right, and then
Yeah.
they get dropped on this landing page. And if they feel for even an instant that they've landed in the wrong place, they're going to leave. So we have to make it really clear really quickly that they're in the right place. And the way to do that is, as you're saying, have the same image, the same language, the same color scheme, the same look and feel and tone, so that what sent them to the destination is reflected at the destination. And that's going to make it easy for them to find what they're looking for, and it's going to make them feel that they're in the right place. And it just increases the likelihood that they're going to do what the marketer wants them to do. If somebody sees something that they think they want and they land at a place where they don't think they're going to be able to find it, they leave, and they
Yeah.
find somebody else. So I think you're spot on with your advice.
Well,
You
thank
want
you.
that consistency.
Yeah, because I thought that was just me, but you say it so much more articulately than I do. But I come from the school where the confused buyer always says no, and I think with advertising that gets lost too often, and people, for whatever reason, get distracted by squirrels, and then they jump to something else. That's, I think, one of the problems a lot of times in social media is because you don't draw that linear path where they're seeing the same creative to keep them through the journey. They get distracted by everything else that keeps them, gives them a reason to become disengaged and lose a little bit of that familiarity. But jumping back, how can personalization in ads help bridge that familiarity also?
So personalization works, and there are many, many, many studies that show that. I think Experian ran a study, and they found just personalizing a subject line in an email can get you a 29.3% lift in opening rates. But I would say, as smart marketers know, that personalization goes beyond just somebody's name. We can personalize by demographics, by psychographics, by past purchase behavior. But personalization works because it signals to somebody that this is relevant, that it's meaningful, and that it's meant for them. And when you find something that's relevant, when you find something that you think is very pertinent to you, you're that much more likely to engage with it. You're that more likely to follow through with it. When you get the sense that you're getting mass marketed to, that you're getting a message that everybody else has gotten, your interest is a little bit less, and your ability to draw the link between that product or service and you is a little bit weaker. But when we start to personalize things, we make that link that much stronger. We make it much more clear to the target that our message is right for them, and therefore our product or service is right for them.
So, what do you see working the best from a channel perspective? Where can behavioral science have the biggest impact in marketing? As a marketer today, is it email? Is it search, banner ads, social blog, etc.? What do you sort of see working the best?
That's an interesting question, and I don't have a very specific answer because I really believe that behavioral science techniques can be applied almost agnostically, regardless of channel or media. You can use behavioral science in your emails, in your banner ads, in your TV, in your direct mail pieces, in your telemarketing scripts, in your face-to-face sales encounters. It really is just it's great information to have when you're trying to persuade somebody, regardless of channel, because social scientists have found that, again, we have a tendency to just default to these hardwired behaviors. And if we as marketers know that, we can use it. And whether we're writing the sales script, or whether we're writing the TV script, or whether we're writing the, the search ad, we can use any of these techniques. So, I mean, you could argue, well, it's easier to do something in the digital media than in the offline world, because offline just takes longer to get results, and it's more expensive to change something, and it takes longer to change something. So you could start to make comparisons like that. But I really believe that these techniques work regardless of your channel, regardless of your media. It's anytime you've got two people who are interacting, that's when you can use behavioral science.
Well, I would love to tell you that was a test question, and I was still going to give you an A plus, but it wasn't. You, yeah, I think you answered it 100%. I don't think there's any one because it has to be done from an omni-channel approach, and that familiarity should drive behavior regardless of the channel if you do it correctly. And I could not agree with you more in how you just answered that. So, you speak all over the world. You're one of my favorite speakers. I've seen you speak several times. I've listened to a lot of your different podcasts and seen you on YouTube a lot. But what's the most important advice that you give to marketers today?
Well, I think you're not going to be surprised by this, but I think it's to apply behavioral science to your marketing strategies, into your marketing executions. For so many years, we talked about having the right message to the right person at the right time. And that is a smart thing to do. That's absolutely what we should be doing. But sometimes we can have the right message to the right person at the right time and not get the right results. And it's because we haven't really thought about how people are going to react to that message, how they're going to process it, whether or not they're going to notice it. And behavioral science allows us to serve it up in the right way so that it will be noticed, and it will make it through to somebody's subconscious, and it will trigger some of those hardwired behaviors that get people to just act automatically without thinking. And in this day and age, that gives marketers a huge advantage.
Agreed. So, Nancy, is this at least the most amazing podcast that you've ever been on today?
It is it's the most amazing podcast I've been on today, this week, this month, possibly ever. Thank
Nice.
you very much for having me.
Well, I'm a big fan. Did you hear the one about the behavioral scientist that walked into a bar?
I have not.
I may edit this out depending on your response. The bartender said, "Do you want this new beer or the one that you're familiar with and get all the time?" Yeah, I'll edit that out. So, Nancy,
That's
it's
cute.
that's I just made that up too. If it shouldn't surprise you, Nancy, it's that special time in the show. Are you ready for the 5 most important questions that you're going to be asked today?
I'm ready.
All right, here we go. Social science or behavioral economics?
Social science, because it's a little bit more all encompassing.
Nice. Aspirin or Bayer?
Aspirin until I land the bear account.
Nice. Good idea. More preferred way to get people to do what we want. Von Restorff effect or eye magnet words? You got to pick
I
one.
magnet words.
Okay.
I magnet words.
All right. The word new or the word free?
Free.
And this is an obvious follow up question to all the other four. And the most important question that you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
Cornbread.
Nice. Nancy, where can people find out more about you, follow your thought leadership, marketing advice, and more?
Well, you can follow me on Twitter. I'm at N Harhut, Nharhut. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. Your listeners are welcome to email me at nharhut@me.com. I'd love to hear from anybody who wants to reach out.
Yeah, and I highly encourage anybody to go listen to her speak because you will definitely learn something. Nancy, thank you so much for being with us today on A Shark's Perspective.
Dennis, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. It's been
Most
fun.
welcome. So there was my conversation with Nancy Harhut, a creative marketer, a behavioral scientist, and a really good and smart speaker. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with her. First, at the end of the day in marketing, we want people to make decisions. As she said, if we as marketers start to apply that to our strategies and to our creative executions, we increase the likelihood that we're going to get people to do what we want them to do. And that's the difference between being, generally speaking, a good marketer and being a good marketer who embraces behavioral science. So what are some of the ways that we can apply behavioral science to our strategies? One way is well known and spoken and written about, and that's through storytelling. Another is using the von Restorff effect, where you present something different in order to help people notice things that are unlike other things around them, and then remember them better. Another is the psychology of surprise. Catching people off guard, if you will, helps sharpen and it focuses attention. Second, social scientists have found that up to 95% of our purchase decision making takes place in the subconscious brain, where we rely on these decision making shortcuts, where we're not deliberately making decisions, not always logically, not always rationally, not always weighing the pros and the cons. Sometimes we might be spending more for something as simple as a pain reliever. And I loved her example where people picked a strong brand name like Bayer over the generic equivalent of the same product. It also shows the value of a powerful brand. Third, so in your advertising, she talks about using behavioral science in your ads in order to make them more noticed and acted upon by using eye magnet words that attract the human eye. Words like you and new and free and secrets and because. Another is personalization, which works well because it signals to people that it's relevant. You often ignore it or pay less attention when you know that you're being mass marketed to without personalization. And this should go way beyond just adding your name to the first of an email. Another is familiarity, which works well with ads across the journey. When people click on an ad, they need immediate reassurance that they've clicked through to the right place so that they don't leave or jump. As Nancy said, we have to make it really clear, really quickly, that they're in the right place. And the way to do that is to have the same image, the same language, the same color scheme, the same look and feel and tone, so that what sent them to the destination is reflected at the destination. And that's going to make it easy for them to find what they're looking for. And it's going to make them feel like they're in the right place. And it just increases the likelihood that they're going to do what the marketer wants them to do. Couldn't agree more. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. It's been my honor to spend this time with you in order to discuss another one of many components that makes up marketing today. So here's a little advice I heard recently. Break loose from the familiar, launch out into the deep, and don't let fear govern your life. And join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.